Mr. Singlet's back at you here with another holiday project, and this one will be including each of these, the green, the white, and the red glass. So this is going to be a pretty cool pattern. I think you're going to like it a lot. It's old Mr. Grinch. Okay, so this is the project. So the number 1 glass we are going to be using as the red. See, each one is marked with a number. The number 2 glass is going to be the white, and the number 3 glass is going to be the green. Before we get cutting, I do want to go ahead and start marking this glass a little bit. So this number 3 glass, it's got this directional texture to it. See all that? That's why I put the lines in there. For this, I'm gonna want the texture to be kind of with this direction right here. I want it to be going the length of his fingers, like that. So I'm going to go ahead and, let's see, this one I'm probably going to want it to be like this. So that's gonna give your eye a little bit of an effect where his fingers are going. This number 2, this is number 2 gloss, is like this. So I'm going to go ahead and give this one the directions that I want. Oops. I should do it like this. And the number 1 gloss really doesn't have much of a direction, so that can be, well, it sort of does, maybe a little bit in this way. So we can go ahead and put one on there too. I'll do it like this. These glasses are pretty transparent. You can see through them pretty easily. Let's see how this red gloss looks. Yeah, you can see through that too. So all these you can cut through the pattern. You don't need to cut the pattern up unless you want to and trace the pieces and all that. So, like we always do, get your cutter oiled up. And we are going to be starting with the number 2 glass. I'm going to be measuring this out like I always do because I want to get the best possible yield. So, I'm going to do this. I'm going to cut this down to about 2 inches. So the way we do that, align the edge of your glass to the edge of the ruler, mark out one area, do the same thing a little lower, and if you want to, you can do a third, and this is just for a check. So you see how this, it all lines up good. If this mark was over here, or this mark was, over here, you would say, oh, something is wrong. But since they all line up, hey, we're good. So we do, glass cutter down, put your ruler up against it, glass cutter down, ruler up against it. Now your ruler is aligned with all 3 pieces. We're going to run that. Oops. So, made kind of a silly mistake. I didn't keep the edge of the ruler right up against that line, and it actually veered off. That's why you see it didn't work out very good. It's actually going to work out fine for this. Just a little bit less than ideal. Don't do that. Here we have the number 2 glass, and it still fits even on the smallest part, so we're good. So we're going to do, this is all curved pieces. This is going to be a little bit more challenging maybe than some other projects. So we're going to do a nice consistent score on that piece. We're going to do this side next. And what I like to do is I like to keep my thumb to help guide it in case it needs a little bit of extra force to push it through. And then we're going to be scoring this up to the previous score. I don't want to waste a bunch of glass and score through it. You see on here how this score stops right here on this score? Right in this spot? I don't want to score that all the way through and waste a bunch of this glass. I want to stop it right there. Now we're going to tap the break through. There we go. We're going to grab our grosiers and we are going to do the flat end on top. That's the scored side. That's the top side. We're going to pop off these little pieces. Just like that. There we go. There we go. So we've got the first piece done. Now what I would like to do is make sure to sweep this pattern off. I don't want to be stabbing myself with a bunch of glass shards. And that looks pretty good. Not perfect, so that looks pretty good. We're going to have to do some grinding for sure. So what I like to do, take my marker and get my head right up to this piece of glass, and I like to identify all the places that need to be grinded, and I like to just mark them out. So that is the first piece, and if you want you can mark it. I'm going to mark it with a dot so I know it's been cut. This is a really tiny number 2 piece that we have to cut. Let's see how it's going to go. So what I'm going to do first, I'm actually just going to start the cut from down here because I know I can use that little cutoff for this piece on the ornament. So we're going to run it up right on that black line. Do the same thing on this side. And do the same thing for the last one. There we go. Now I'm going to do some taps. Try to get this bigger piece separated. There we go. Hopefully that broke like we wanted it to. This piece I might be able just to pop off just like that. Let's see how this looks. Okay, looks like we've got another piece we have to pop off. This is a little tricky. Whenever you have a really small piece like this, you have to kind of be careful. You don't want to hurt yourself. So what I like to do in something like this is I actually like to have a second pair of pliers, because I really don't want this to just, you know, stab my hand. Pliers you choose to use doesn't really matter. You just need to secure it. Acting as your fingers pretty much. Just break the glass like normal. This is the cutoff. Very tiny piece. And this one goes right in there. See that? So that's where that goes. I'm going to put it over here with this one. Now we've got a little cutoff for this piece. So we can cut that one. Another really small piece. Right on that line, right in the center of it. Try to keep that nice consistent pressure, and make sure to keep that consistent pressure on the piece of glass so you're not moving around too much, and your score lines will be accurate. So when you break the glass, it'll be right where you want it to be. And that's pretty typical to happen when there's not very much meat between the two pieces. Grab it right here and just, this thing just acts like it's your hand, really. And I'm just going to do that, sweep off all that debris. This came out pretty good, not perfect. What I'm going to do is try to get these little ridges where the ornament is. I'm going to try to get that with the grinder. I think it'll be a little easier. So I'm going to mark out right here a little bit, mark out right here a little bit. And of course we have to remove that sharp edge right there. And I'll just knock down any of the sharp edges so it protects my hands when we're foiling. That is it for the first piece, for the first color I should say. Now we're moving on to the green. So this is number 3. This is Mr. Grinch himself. Each one is actually really thin. Since the direction is going this way, I think we're going to just cut this down to about 1/2 inch. Let me see what this is. This is about 1 inch. I think we'll cut it down to 1 inch, and then we'll get about 2 pieces per, throughout the whole thing. So that should be plenty. So we'll cut this down. The texture is going vertically, or long ways of this piece, so that way we'll stay oriented properly whenever we are cutting out his fingers. So we'll start with this piece. Do a nice long score all the way. Keep your elbow moving. That's how you're going to get the nice curve in your score lines. Keep that glass secure so that the score lines are all in the right place. There we go. We got all 3. I'm going to break this with my hands. I'm going to try to anyway. And we see we have a little bit left over there. I'm going to go ahead and grab the grosers. There we go. Now we've got this. I'll have to grind this down a little bit. Make sure it's a nice curve, not a little point right there on the corner there. We have a couple more areas where the score line is really small. I cannot break that with my fingers. Between the glass edge and the score line, you have to use the grosers. Unless you're some sort of superhuman. We're going to sweep off the pattern, get any of that debris off. There we go. First piece is done. We're going to put that right here. And we're starting to see this thing come to life a little bit. Let's see, how did I have this cut? I think it was like this. Oh man, this is tricky sometimes. Is this even the right piece? Oh no, it's not the right piece, that's the problem. Here's the right piece. All these little shards, cutoffs look like they're the right piece, but they're not. There we go, so that's how this is gonna look. First piece right there. Now we're gonna do the second piece. Now we've got the texture going this way. See how I've got this line oriented properly? So this is going to be a cylinder piece. Let's see how we do it. We're going to start with this almost 90 degrees. That's a pretty hefty curve. So I think I'm gonna probably put this panel into the list of maybe more of an intermediate level, because it's got some pretty steep curves here on these cuts. Okay, now let me show you an important concept. Talked about it before, but on this score line right here, you'll see that I started it on this other score line. So I did this one first, and then I did this one, but I didn't start it back here because I didn't want to waste its glass. So that's a good way to not have to waste glass, but be able to score the whole thing without having to keep breaking pieces off. It's a little more efficient that way. So we'll break off, this is not very much meat. And you want to do the flat end on top, the curved end on the bottom, and the scores on the top, of course. Now with something like this, I like to tap it through. So let's go ahead and try that. And when I tap it through, I normally keep my finger stabilizing both sides of the score line. So if it does break in my hands, it won't just fall to the ground. I'll control the pieces. There we go. We'll keep tapping it through. And you'll see that score line just starting to really run through to the other side. And this is really tricky right here. The score line is going right, it's really thin. So that's why I'm being a little bit careful, or else it'll just break off and I'll have to recut it. Which isn't the end of the world. Oh, look, it did exactly what I didn't want it to do. If you look closely, see how that score line continued over here to this corner, but it broke through kind of more vertically. So that's what you don't want. Let's look why. Let's look at what that actually would look like if we tried to use it. See how it's going to just remove that fingertip? That's not going to look very good, so we're going to recut that. You know, this might not necessarily go to waste. We can probably see, but we can reuse it in somewhere else. And look, here's another cutoff we might even be able to use. And this one might even give us a little bit of a better chance. Let's give it a shot. Oops, see, it moved a little bit, which is actually not a big deal since we haven't scored anything else yet. So we're just going to score that right there. Okay. Now we're going to score this part right here. There we go. Score this one right here. And we're going to need to do a nice score right here as well. And this is probably going to have to be grounded. This is almost nothing between the edge of the glass and the score line. Let's take a look at that. Almost nothing right here on this side. All this area. So this is probably going to be grinded down. We can do our best with the grocer, see what happens. But I'm pretty sure that's going to have to be grinded. So we got the flat end on top, which is the scored side. We'll start popping these little pieces off. And this is where we had trouble last time. But you see what happened was, the other time we were trying to pretty much break that whole curve from one piece, this one was already separated. That's why we had a little bit better luck this time. Oop, let's see what happens. See there? And you just, sometimes you can just work it out. Now this is where we don't want to mess up. So we're just putting a little bit of pressure, downward pressure with our thumb. I mean, just trying to pretty much pull this apart like that. See that? So now that gave us that nice curve that we're looking for. We've got a little bit of meat right here we need to remove. There we go. Now this is going to need some grinding to clean it up, but hey, at least we got the shape. That's important. So let's see how it looks. Alright, now that I can live with. It needs a little bit of grinding here and there, but that I can live with. I think it's just going to need to be removing all those fractured edges. You need those edges. Whenever you're cutting this glass, you need it to be a nice 90 degrees. You want the edge to look like this. You don't want it to have a bunch of fractures that make it go off like that. That's going to make it really hard for the copper foil to stick. So that looks like this. See how that's not, that's not, let's see if we can see it from the same angle. See how that is? Not 90 degrees right there? That's sort of what this is. We want it to look like that. You know, we want it to look more like this. Even this is still not quite perfect, but it's better. Okay. So we've got the second green piece. Another tricky cut. Another tricky cut. Let's see. Now this one, it's got such an awkward shape that we're not going to get the best yield out of this glass, but these are the biggest pieces. And there's another important thing to learn here. You want to try to cut the biggest pieces first. because that is going to allow you to use the cutoffs for the smaller pieces, and you'll get the best yield out of your glass. So if you go and you start cutting all the smallest pieces first, well, now you're going to have to cut out the bigger pieces, and you're going to have a bunch of little cutoffs that you could have used, but it's too late now since you already cut the smaller pieces. Just something to keep in mind if you're trying to get the best yield out of your glass. There we go. So that's a pretty tricky score, but we got it. We're definitely going to be tapping this one through kind of slowly and carefully. You can see that separation starting to occur. We just want to work that through. When you get one area done, move to the next area. See that? There you go. See, it's really starting to separate. Now this is not the separation, that's just a line. See, the separation goes right like that, almost like an S shape. Try to get that all the way to the edge if we can. That's the most important part. Whoop, scared me. Okay, so we got that off. Let's check it out. Yeah, so that broke pretty good. That one we can live with. So now we have to do the other side. And it's always a little bit harder, the second one, because there's not as much meat to it. So it has more of a chance to break in an awkward way. So we'll just keep tapping that breakthrough. See that? It's always kind of hard to tap right in these areas where there's almost no glass. And this little tiny piece is being a little bit stubborn. So we're just going to take our... Oh, there we go. We got a good hit on that one. See that? Okay, now what we're going to do, we're going to start trying with the grosses, because this piece is in a very weak position. When it's very thin like this, you don't want to force it, or else you're going to be recutting it a lot. Might get lucky, but probably... See how we just barely put a little bit of force? We're just working that separation now. That's all we're doing. Just working that separation. Just working it. No rush. Take your time. And now with this one, it'll probably pretty much come undone. Let's see. Just take your time with it. It's possible maybe I didn't quite score it all the way to the edge. It's separating there. Okay, there it goes. Okay, now that's a good position to be in. It's pretty much separated. It just needs a little bit more. And sometimes with your fingers, that's all it takes. So let's see how this fits. Okay, pretty good. Not perfect, but pretty good. It'll do. It'll do for sure. Now we're going to go ahead and mark where we need to grind it, and that's okay. That's okay. I'm pretty pleased with this thing so far. And this one will just be grinded down just a little bit more. So that will fit in there. It's a little tricky because it's so small. It's kind of moving around on me just a little bit, but I think we can manage. We just have to be really careful with it. Really steady with our hands and our grip. Switching the grip mid-cut to get my finger out of the way. There we go. Got a bunch of little scores out of that one. Just pop them off with the grocers like normal. Now this might be too thin to hold with my hands. We'll see if I can get it. Okay, I got it. See if we can get these little tiny areas off. And I think that these blue gloves are giving me a little bit of a false sense of security here. But it's working out so far. Okay, we got this piece. Let's see it back on the pattern. That came out pretty good. It needs a little bit of grinding, but nothing we can't work with. Definitely nothing we can't work with. That came out really good. And we'll add that. It goes somewhere over here. Okay, so there we go. So this is the piece that we're keeping. This is a very small piece, like all of them. There we go. Got these little tiny areas. Just take that off right there. Got it? Now there's not necessarily any reason why you can't make these a little bit bigger, but the reason why they are this size is because in case we want to hang them, we don't want them to be too big and that it's too heavy for the actual hook or whatever it's being hung from. So we want to make sure that it's going to work out good for that purpose. But if you wanted to make it bigger and you wanted to beef up the framing around it or however you want to do it, nothing to say you can't. Now, did I actually cut the same piece again? Or did I cut this piece? Okay, we've got a couple more scores to do on that. One right there. And one right here. And now when you're scoring glass, you don't really want to go back and forth on it. You just want to do one straight score if possible. Sometimes on really small spots it's okay, but you don't want to damage your cutter, the cutter head as much as possible. And you want to make sure that that score line, there's only going to be one specific one so that you get the right cut every time. If you got two score lines, it might break along one or the other. So it's a little bit harder to control that. If you have one score line, then you know which one's going to break on. There we go. Get that little piece off. And that's a pretty good piece right there. We'll have to grind it down just to smooth out those rough edges. Now we've got one more piece, and I think I can actually get out of this cutoff. So we didn't have to use our bigger cutoff. Cut this right through there. Got it. Got that. And we got that. Alright. And before you know it, that's the last green piece. So now what we need to do is cut the red pieces, the number 1 glass. What we're going to do is cut this out at about 1.5 inches. Now this piece does have a smooth and a textured side. See, this is the glossier side, it's a little bit smoother. And this side, you see it's got a lot more texture. So that is why we're going to be cutting on this side. So I think I said at 1.5 inches, so we're going to do the same thing. Orient this edge of the glass with the edge of the ruler. Mark your 1.5 in 2 spots. Orient the cutter wheel to the mark. Bring the ruler up to it. Cutter wheel to the mark, ruler up to it. Consistent score. Now this time I'm just going to be using my hands. Consistent pressure. Your index fingers underneath the score line. Thumbs on top. Rotate in different directions. You push your index finger up and you push your thumbs down. Kind of like breaking a dark chocolate or a Hershey's chocolate bar. And now we've got our piece. So this piece will encompass both the ornament and his little Santa's sleeve there. So this piece, what I want to do is I want to give myself a little bit more meat to cut that little ornament part. So we're going to run this up. And we're going to do some elbows back and forth, get some little bit of a jagged edge there for that ornament. We're going to go back on the bottom part and just do that nice circle, moving that elbow the whole time. And what we're probably going to do, let's see if we can tap this through. Okay, this gave me pretty much exactly what I wanted. Let's see if we can see it here. See that? It's got some jagged edges for that ornament. Kind of like the pattern. That's what we wanted. And we can grinder up all these other edges. I'll probably try to gross them off as much as I can, then we'll clean them up. So let's tap it through on the bottom side. Again, I'm holding where it's going to break so it doesn't both fall. See how it broke in my hands? And I just got my finger pinching both sides so it doesn't fall. So now, this is pretty common with circles. You're going to have to really clean up the edges a little bit. Right here is where I wanted all of my ornaments to meet up to that ornament holder thing. So we're going to kind of just snip off these parts here. And then we're going to grind this down to really smooth it out. And we're going to keep this part a little bit more jagged, and we might even emphasize those jagged edges a little bit, because we want these two to meet up really nicely. Kind of like, not like quite like that, but I want it to be meeting up a little bit better if we can. So that's the first piece, and we're almost done cutting this project out. And now the second piece, it's just the sleeve. So we'll cut this first, cut this next, so we've got all the scores right there in one shot. I'll pop that off first, and then I'll go with the grosers, and I'll just pop the rest of these pieces right off. There we go. Now we just need to take these to the grinder, get these all cleaned up, and then we can start copper foiling these. So we're making good progress. And now we are ready to start copper foiling. Or actually, we have to clean them up first before we copper foil. So the way we do that, just take a rag and just start cleaning up all the edges especially. You don't want any more grinder dust on these edges, because that will prevent the adhesive of the copper foil from adhering properly. It looks like we still might need to grind a little bit more down right there. You see that? That's something we don't want, so I think I'm going to go ahead and grind that down just a little bit more here in a moment. Set that one aside, and then we'll check all these as we keep cleaning them up. It's right here, that's where I'm trying to get that ornament to meet up with the ornament holder part just a little bit better, a little more realistic looking, even though we're doing a Grinch who is not exactly the most historical figure. Let me go grind this down. I'll be right back. Now you can see, nice and 90 degrees, like this one. We are ready to bring this over here and start copper foiling. This is my little copper foiling jig, my favorite way to copper foil. So it's got this groove right here you feed the pieces into, just like this. We've got our nice clean edge. And this one, let's see if, there we go, got it. So you just feed it in there, and you just push that piece through. Now the very beginning part, where you first fed it through, it's going to come up, see this one right here, this shiny copper foil part? You're going to want to fold that over just like that. And then it's going to go right back into that groove. There you go, just like that. Fold out just a little bit more, cut that off. And now you've got a foiled piece. It just needs to be folded over. So we've got our termination point right there. Fold that over, and we'll just go around the whole thing, just folding it over, just like this. And then in a few moments, we'll go and burnish everything down. Now this tiny piece is a little bit tricky. So now we're gonna stick it through the little groove, adhere it. And yes, this foiler even works for tiny pieces like this one. So we need to fold over the beginning. No matter what, you have to do that, big or small. And then we'll just run it down into there. There we have it. Fold out a little bit, and if it, you know, a tiny piece like this is a little more trouble for the foiler. And if you have it, see how it's not perfectly centered? You can just peel it up one time and just center it up right there, just by hand. There you go. And now that's nice and centered. And now you just fold it over like the rest. No matter what, if you're copper foiling by hand or you're using a little jig or a little table foiler, the smaller pieces are always going to be a little bit trickier, but that's okay, we got it. This red piece, part of Santa Claus's sleeve there. Just feed it through the center of that groove. Remember to fold over the very beginning. And now that we've got a little bit of a bigger piece, I can show you my zip and fold method. That's what I call it. And I'm sure I did not make it up. But this is the way I like to do it. I like to fold it over, turn the corner, fold it over, zip it up, fold the corner, zip it up, fold that corner over, zip it up, and then fold it over last time. There you have it, a nice foiled piece. Cleaned up, stick it in that groove, centers it up, roll it on through, fold over that beginning though, don't forget that part. There we go, and it's got a little bearing in there, and that's the very first force that's applying the foil to the edge of the glass, that little bearing. So you can just roll that piece along there. And no matter what, every copper foiling technique can have a little bit of a learning curve. So if you do end up trying this technique out, give it some time. Don't just try it one time and say, oh, nope, not doing that. Doesn't work for me. Give it a shot. Give it some time. Try out a few projects on it. I think you'll like it as much as I do. Okay, we've got another one of these tiny pieces. Honestly, something this small might actually not work in the Creator's Foiler. You might have to just feed out a little bit of that material. Let's see if I can get it with this tiny piece. Maybe not. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab another piece, stick it through, pull that foil through, and now I'm going to do this piece by hand. It's really just too small. And that's okay. It's really not a big deal. You see, even by hand, it's still not easy to do. So that's why everything's gonna have a little bit of a learning curve. This foil might be getting a little bit too. The adhesive is starting to fail, so I'm gonna go ahead and cut that off, and we'll get a fresh part. Now we're gonna try to adhere it. Turn that corner. And to try to keep that centered on that foil. Keep it centered. And turn the corner, do the same thing. And then we're just gonna go ahead and get a nice overlap here. It's a small, tiny piece. Let's get a nice overlap. There we go. Let's go right there. Got it. Not too bad. Little tiny piece right there. So if you find that, see, this is starting to pull through a little bit, we can just pull it from the back side. See that? And now we can restart to feed these pieces in. This is just why I really like this foiler. Now, this is, of course, not a highly in-depth guide of all the methods and the tools and the techniques on how to foil. And if you are looking for something like that, check up on the screen right now. It'll be about right here for the card to a video, a tutorial, full tutorial on how to copper foil and what to use and the different materials and the different tools and pretty much everything there is to know about how to copper foil steinglass. So if this is not quite as much information as you are hoping to find out about this process, check that video. And we've got a couple of other guides from cutting to soldering. We even have full DIY builds. So kind of like this, but on a little bit more bigger scale. And you might enjoy those too. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and cut this off. Folding it over, fold it over. Fold it over, zip it up. Keep folding it over. For this right here is where the terminating foil did not overlap with the existing foil perfectly. So we're going to have to smooth out that uneven transition. I'll show you how to do that with a razor blade. Got another small piece here. Oh, look, right here's what you don't want to see. See that? See all that glass dust? Let's take that off. That's from grinding the glass, so you want to avoid that. Pull this through. Now this is a really small piece. I think I'm going to just go ahead and foil the rest by hand. Now I'm going to actually fold it over as we do it. I'll just fold this piece right in the center. Got it. Now we'll just pull it through, cut the piece. We are all foiled up And now you can see there's a lot of these kind of dimpled edges. It's all crinkled up. Now we need to start burnishing. And to burnish, you're going to need a fid. This is my personal favorite. Some people can use just a marker, or different pieces of plastic or wood will work. But I prefer this because it has a flat edge and a curved edge. So what you want to do first is start on the edges, because you do not want to trap any air inside of the foil. So we'll start on the edges. Be sure not to knock off the termination point. You want to push with it, not against it. And here we are trying to burnish in where we're going to connect the ornament part to it. And so now to do the faces, you want to push it down and in towards the center. So that's what this looks like right here. And you're trying to flatten out all of those crinkles. And the reason why is because the solder is going to pretty much take shape to anything, you know, that the copper foil is. So if you have a copper foil that's very crinkled, or if you have one that's not quite adhered properly, that's really the substrate that the solder is depending on. And you want to do it hard enough to where it removes all of the imperfections, but also not so hard that you break it like I did here. And if we do break off a piece, we can fix it. We just go back to the foiler and reapply in that one spot. And with the Creator's foiler, extremely quick and easy to do that. Make sure to put that edge down, knock down that copper foil face, and right here is where it's going to meet up to that ornament. Even these small ones, you got to do the edges first, just like this. And you might think that the smaller, when it's smaller, it's easier. It's not. Really, they're a little tougher. It's a little more finesse required. Whereas the bigger pieces, they're a lot easier to cut, a lot easier to handle, to, you know, apply pressure to, grab your hand, keep stable. So that's why those are a little easier normally. But these are good for beginners too, because it will teach you how to handle glass, and you don't use as much glass on the smaller projects, so that's always helpful in terms of budget. And I promise, if you can do a smaller window, you can do a bigger window. So that's going to meet up pretty good right there. I'm pretty pleased with that right there. See how these bigger pieces, you can just get them in a more stable position. Another important reason why you want to burnish is because you don't want for there to be a gap between the glass and the surface of the copper foil. That's just really not the right, it's really a problem, because you can get flux under there, you can get impurities, you can cause the glass to separate from the solder. There's a lot of problems that can happen if you're not having a really well burnished piece. And that's also why you want to try to avoid touching the edges and even the face where the copper foil is going to be overlaying, because you don't want to prevent it from adhering properly. So we're just going to keep on doing the edges first. Do the faces in towards the center. Don't do it out. You're going to knock it off. Oops. That's why you want to sweep off your pattern, because that stuff will get you. Right here's a tiny piece. See how these corners are flaring out? That's what I meant by where it gets bunched up a lot in the corners especially. There we go. I'm actually going to show you something else I'm going to do to this project to make it look a little bit better, because I want for this green to show, well, I want it to show more on this side. I'm gonna trim it up a little bit. And right here is that other spot we were talking about earlier, where we want that smoother transition right there. So I'm going to show you how to trim that up as well with a razor blade. See how right here it's a little bit not the way we want it? We're just going to to a tiny bit of trimming. Just a little bit right there. Just move that off. And see, now it's a nice smooth transition right there. There we go. Just flatten all that area. Making good progress. See, the little fingers coming there. And I'm looking through this. It might be hard to tell on camera, but you can kind of see how it's pretty uneven on the back side. I'm going to trim that down from the back side just a little bit. Okay, take a look at what we've got so far. This is going to be tricky because there are so many little pieces. So what we're going to do is tack solder it, holding individual pieces in the position that I want them. And we're going to try to mimic this pattern as much as possible. So we're going to get the soldering iron fired up. For soldering, we're going to need a few things. First of all, of course, we'll be using our lead-free solder. And we are going to need some wire for this. I'm probably going to use either this tool or this tool to handle some of the hot glass. We're going to need our flux. I've got some poured into a little cap here. We're going to need our N95 mask. And I've got a fume extractor here. Oh, and I'm going to be wearing some gloves because I don't really like to handle the flux with my bare hands. Okay, we've got some chain here, and we don't need very much. I think I'm going to actually maybe put about this much on there. Sometimes what you have to do is you have to grab it with one, and then grab it with another, pliers, and then you can pry it open. Now what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be kind of keeping them together with a few tools while soldering instead of doing the nails, because it's just going to be a real hassle to do the nails. So we're going to start with the bigger pieces first. So I'm going to get these the way I want them. I'm going to apply just a tiny bit of flux. Just enough to just barely get this. We're just tacking this together right now. Now we're just going to get a drop of solder onto this iron. And we're going to just move this stuff, these pieces of glass, into the position that we want them. And we're just going to put just a little droplet of solder on there. And that's it. That's all you need just to tack it together for right now. Grab another droplet. Got it. Oops. Do not want that one. There we go. Now we'll let that dry. Okay, now we're going to mess with this grain piece. So we're going to want to unhook those two. Get away. Okay, now I'm actually just going to start moving some pieces away so I don't accidentally start soldering them up. We're going to put the pieces that we've already soldered onto the pattern. We're going to move the green piece in where we want it. And we're going to secure it with a tool so that we don't burn ourselves. And sometimes I'll push them together just like that. Now this is still not quite where I want it, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to heat it up. And we might actually need to secure this down at least a little bit. So let's get a nail right here where these two meet up. Right there. So we'll kind of push that into that spot, and then we'll push this one into this spot where they meet up on the bottom. And now everything is fairly solid. So that is exactly what we need to do. So now we can heat this up, move this piece out just a little bit into the right spot. There we go. Now that's where I want it, right there. See that? Now that's tacked in position, and it's all holding together because we have these two nails securing it. So now we can grab the next piece. And I think we're going to start with this tiny little piece. We're going to get that soldered. We'll just tack that on right there. You can tell this thing's getting very hot when the flux starts to sizzle like that. Just grab a droplet of solder. And we're not going to use our hands. We're going to use a tool because we're smart. We're smart. So that's why we're using the tool, not our hands. There we go. So that's going to hold perfectly. Now we can do the next piece. Flex those up. There we go. And that will hold right there. We'll grab the next piece. Flex this up. There we go. That will hold right there. Grab it out of the droplet of solder. Drop it right there between those two. That will hold. Keep on moving along. Now we're just going to drop a little bit right there. Got it. And we'll just drop a little bit on this one. There we go. Grab a drop. Position your piece. There you go. Push that one right there where you want it. Let's see if I can open this up just a little bit more. There we go. There, I can just fit that piece in there just a little bit better. There we go. Now we're all tacked up for this part. Now we need to do the ornament. That won't be too bad. Just apply a little bit of flux, just like that. That was a lot actually. Not a little bit, but it's okay. Just tack solder it. Be careful not to burn yourself. Got it. So that's what you want to see. So now that it's tack soldered, everything is holding together very well. Okay? So we really don't even need this pattern anymore because everything is now where it's going to be. And you can kind of start to see what it's going to look like. So now we really just need to solder this thing up and we are good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and get this fume extractor on because it's going to get really fumey. There we go. Flux everything up with a small piece. We're using the 100-watt Weller soldering iron. We're going to kind of try to finish really tacking everything before we start to run our beads. You can see there's a lot of fumes now while we've got the fume extractor on. Keep that away from us. And what I want to do is I'm actually going to flip it over and do the other side first so that we don't undo any pieces. That way we'll have it secured on one side at all times. So I'm going to go ahead and flux this thing up just like that. Now we'll start feeding it on. There we go. Tinning any copper foil, including the edges. This is not the finished state. We're just getting a nice coat of solder. That's going to make everything hold together very nicely. And then once the other side is done, or once this side is done, I'll go to the other side, do the nice bead on that side. And then we'll come back and do the nice bead on this side. And by that time, everything will be very solidified. And that thing is very hot, so be careful not to hurt yourself. So now we're going to get a coat on here, and we can finish up on this side with a nice bead. And it is very hot, so be careful. You might need to wear some heat-resistant gloves for this piece, because it's very small. We'll continue on over here to this whole side. There we go. Now we want to really get this thing of a nice bead. So we're going to feed some solder, and we're going to keep this bead running, keep it nice and smooth. We want it to look really smooth, round, like a nice round bead. There we go. Just like that. Anywhere that these pieces connect, we want a nice round bead. This is all too flat in this area. We're going to add a little more solder. Get it all molten hot again. And sometimes I'll tap it, and that'll make it run evenly, level out evenly and smoothly. If you hold it on there too long, you could melt it from the backside, and then it starts to fall through between the glass. So you want to avoid that if possible. So we can go to the other side now. And you honestly probably should let it sit for just a few minutes, let it cool off. I think that'll give you the best results, but let's see how we do it without doing that. You don't want the solder to completely cover that little piece. Okay, and now let's flip this over and finish this one. So I like to use these 2 pieces of wood so I don't have to hold the actual stained glass, because it does get very hot, and it also, the solder can drip onto your hands. Now, unless you like to get burned by hot solder droplets, you're going to want to avoid your hands being underneath the solder when you're edge beading. And I don't want to be holding it like this, drop the solder right on my hand. That would hurt. And this is how I do it. It's a nice, cheap way to do it. And then we're just putting some nice beads on there. And this is really going to strengthen this little panel. You don't necessarily want to just pin it. You want a bead on there. That's going to give it a lot of good soldered surface area. And that's going to make it nice and strong. Something like this is a little tricky. There's a lot of... you're fighting against gravity anytime you're doing this. So you've got to do your best, and if it globs up, we can always fix those globs when we go put it flat again. We can always fix that. So that's okay. And as you rotate this piece, you'll start to see, oh, I can do this spot a little easier than I did before. This piece is so small it doesn't actually go up over this 2x4. So what we have to do, you do have to use your hands to expose the edges that you need to edge bead. And I'll normally just feed a little bit onto the tip, and then we'll just feed it onto the edge. And this is really hot on my fingers right now. I am actually going to let that cool down because it is way too hot. We can start on the other one. So, ooh, this one is super hot. I'm going to let that dry and go back to the other one. Or let it cool, I should say. There we go. Now you just rotate it. Try to keep your hands away from underneath it as much as you can. Just keep rotating and working around these curves, these edges. Add a little bit more. So a couple areas, and you can see on the face of this, it needs to be cleaned up a little bit. So the edge is pretty good. Now I want to go back and smooth out all of the face. Well, this one we still have to do, but yeah, it's cooled off enough. We can go ahead and continue this one. And then we'll have to stop again because it'll be way too hot. Okay, now we can come back and continue this. So we're just smoothing all this out the same way we did before. Just get it all molten. Level it all out. Let's go ahead and reflex it. It'll help it flow just a little bit better. And sometimes you might have to add additional solder, and that will help it flow as well. There you go, just like that. We're going to go ahead and let it cool and then flip it over. We'll check on our ornament. It needs to be smoothed out from this side. There we go, looking good. There we go. And we've got this pretty well edge beaded. Now we need to start adding the wire, because this is how we are going to attach these two with the chain. So we'll get this, do the loop just like that, cut this piece off here, and now I'm going to braid it up, and now I'm going to cut this because we don't need that much material. If you look right here, probably we're going to need about, maybe to about right here. So that we should be able to submerge in there. And that I think we can make work. So let's give that a shot. I'm going to go ahead and hold it with this so I don't hurt myself. We're going to apply some flux to both items. And now we are going to try to submerge this into the pool of solder. So let's get this heated up. So we have submerged this into the pool of solder. Let that dry. Oh, you know what? I did it on the wrong spot. Oops, it needs to go right there, not right there. Okay, let's take it out. Not too bad. Okay, this is the right spot. We'll grab some more solder. And we will submerge it into the pool of solder once again. There we go. So now this one is pretty much done. It just needs to cool off and we need to clean it up and then we'll attach the chain. Okay, now this one we're going to need to attach another hook. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to loop this like we did before. And this one we're going to have to do a kind of a couple steep curves here. So we're going to do it like this, and then we're going to bend it kind of sharply down that ornament. Kind of like this. Let's see how that looks. But I think that'll pretty much work right there, just like that. If we get that much surface area, this thing will hold forever. It's very light. So that'll hold right there. Okay, we're going to try to tack it on right in the middle of that glass edge. So we're going to try to flex it up just a little bit. And I already know I need to get my hands way away from this. And we're going to just put a droplet of solder right onto it. See what that looks like. We're just trying to tack this thing in here so we can work on it. Got it? Alright. So that's going to for sure hold. Now we just need to solder the rest of it on there and get a good bond. Sometimes I'll even tap this thing down to the contours of the actual piece of glass. Careful not to do it too hard, you don't want to break your glass. We'll just flex this up just a little bit, can't hurt. And we'll start to drop some pieces of solder on there. There we go. Yeah, that's for sure going to hold. And now, once that dries, we can go ahead and do the top part. We might even be able to do that flat, like this. Let's see. There we go. And now we'll just have to turn it over, do the other side. There we go. And that is definitely going to hold. And there you have it. You've got your loop on your ornament now. You've got your loop on Mr. Grinch. Get your favorite blue glass cleaner, of course, and your rag. Go ahead and get this thing all sprayed down. Get it all cleaned up. Alright, now we just have to connect our chain up. So we'll just grab it with 2 pliers. Just want to separate it. Just pull it apart. Sometimes you can grab it like this and that really makes it easier. There we go. And now we'll put it in through one of them, just like that. And then with 1 plier you can just squeeze it back down. Careful not to break your piece. And then we'll open this side up. We'll squish it back down. If you enjoyed that, we have several more in the playlist linked up above. And this one was a little bit more of an intermediate level. Some of the others are more beginner. Go ahead and check out the playlist up above. Thanks for watching.